This is not my history channel, but history might repeat itself, and that's why I want to talk about this. That on January 22nd in 1924, James Ramsay MacDonald became Britain's first Labour Prime Minister. A people that greets the praise of freedom with a yawn offers its hand to the bonds of bondage, and there can only be an efficient parliamentary government if the people respect the parliamentary institutions. And that is why seeing the decline in Parliament's influence as a sign of the decline of democracy, not as evidence of a superior democratic intelligence. Parliamentary reforms are good, but to degrade Parliament, even a bad one, in the eyes of the people is a crime. These are words that we, unfortunately, understand well again, but which, unfortunately, we still don't understand well enough. They date from 1909, from the pamphlet Socialism and Government by James Ramsay MacDonald. At the time, he was a member of the Parliament for the Labour Party, which was founded in 1906. It was the result of the merger of various organizations, and one of these was the Labour Representation Committee, of which MacDonald was chairman. In this capacity, before the February 1906 election, he had reached an agreement with the Liberal politician Herbert Gladstone, son of former Prime Minister William Gladstone, that the Liberals would not stand candidates in a number of constituencies, so that Labour would have a chance of getting into Parliament. The background was the consideration that the progressive votes should not be split. Until then, this had always led to the victory of a Conservative candidate. And the maneuver was even successful. In 1906, the first Labour MPs came to the House of Commons in London. The fact that James Ramsay MacDonald would one day play such an important role was, as people like to say, not something he knew from the cradle. Simply because there may not even have been a cradle in his parents' house. His father was the farm labourer John MacDonald, his mother Anne Ramsay, a domestic worker. The two were unmarried. A huge problem, as one might think, but certainly for members of the middle class. Things were different among the poor in northern Scotland at the time. 15% of them were born out of wedlock. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to talk about the intelligence, energy, and luck with which James Ramsay MacDonald made his way to becoming Britain's first Labour Prime Minister on January 22nd in 1924. His eloquence certainly played a not insignificant role. The recording of his voice that Wikipedia, for example, provides doesn't really give an idea of this. It becomes all the more clear in his writings. Many of them are freely accessible on the internet, and you can also see the development of his views and the changing attitudes of his party towards him. But let's look again at what I quoted from 1909. That was not directed against the right wing. They had in mind a left-wing attitude that Karl Marx had formulated in the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Modern state power is only a committee that manages the collective affairs of the entire bourgeois class. It was important not to get tangled up in the parliamentary web of struggle and compromise that has become not just a political but a moral question within the socialist movement across Europe. Marx had announced in the Communist Manifesto that there would increasingly only be two classes opposing each other, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. A struggle would be waged between them that would lead to the revolution of the proletariat and the overthrow of the bourgeoisie. But none of this happened. The question of reform or revolution became acute. The departure from Marxist orthodoxy was called revisionism. And James Ramsay MacDonald was very sure that the state offered the oppressed classes an opportunity to improve their situation. They had to organize themselves politically and do so smart as snakes and guileless as doves. And MacDonald was determined to make Labour stronger at the ballot box than the Liberals were. And this was only possible if you took parliamentary work, if you took Parliament seriously. And that also means parliamentary reform. The suffragettes fought for women's suffrage. Many socialists saw this as a ploy by the bourgeoisie to distract from the social question. MacDonald saw it differently. Of course, he felt a real socialist had to side with women. And after 1917, many socialists expected that the October Revolution would breed young people and bring about, well, a world revolution. Well, that didn't happen, we all know that. In 1923, this hope was put to an end with the collapse of the coup attempts in Germany. When MacDonald became Prime Minister on January 22nd in 1924, he was living proof of his theory. Just as he had ensured that Labour candidates made it into Parliament in 1906, he took advantage of the opportunity presented to him when Conservative Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin lost his majority in the December 1923 election and formed a minority government. MacDonald had shown that the path of reforms leads to the goal. But is that the goal? Someone got through? Well, certainly not. On November 4th in 1924, Baldwin again had a majority and became Prime Minister again. The later appeasement Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain became the Health Minister, and later appeasement opponent Winston Churchill became Chancellor of the Exchequer. Baldwin lost the 1929 election and MacDonald became Prime Minister again. The collapse of the global economy was not the moment for social reform. From 1931, MacDonald governed with the Conservatives. In the elections, he called Labour suffered a disaster, though, and many of his party colleagues viewed him as a traitor. He was expelled from the party, and MacDonald became ill, physically and mentally. He resigned in June 1935, and Stanley Baldwin became British Prime Minister for the third time. And James Ramsay MacDonald died on November 9th in 1937 aboard the MV Reina del Pacifico en route from Liverpool to Valparaiso in Chile. The ship voyage, it was said, was intended to get him back on his feet in terms of health, but perhaps they wanted to unobtrusively remove the broken man from circulation. There are a lot of speculations around this. But James Ramsay MacDonald had come a long way, probably further than anyone else at the time, and he had eventually become something of a friend to King George V. But was that a class betrayal? Well, the revolutionary enemies of the bourgeoisie began their lives as children of the bourgeoisie. Are they class traitors too? Well, this may have made them keen-eyed for the vulgarities of the bourgeoisie, but also blind to those of the people, they said. At least that was Gorky's criticism of Lenin. It probably never occurred to MacDonald to deny the class struggle, but neither did it occur to reduce world history and even that of private friendship to it. Today, we are discussing identity or universalism. We know very well that if we want to survive, we need both the self-confidence of belonging and the self-confidence of being something special. The Scott MacDonald, illegitimate child of the rural proletariat, becomes Prime Minister of the largest empire in world history in order to change the world. And when he doesn't succeed, he gives up, or something inside him gives up. A life crushed between reform and revolution, failing in the midst of success. And one got through and fell apart because of it. So we have to hope that 100 years later, and a bit more because the elections will be at the end of this year, again a Labour Prime Minister will be in Downing Street number 10. But compared to the times of MacDonald's, a completely different Labour Prime Minister with a completely different position in the political spectrum. And we're not, well, some people in the Labour Party still do, but in general, we are not talking about any books of Marx and Labour anymore, at least not when we look at their leading team. But it will still be quite interesting what the outcome of the election will be and what the results of the policies will be. And I hope you excuse my little excerpt into history here because I found it very interesting. And I wanted to do this in this kind of 100th anniversary after reading about him. And with all these little links that we have this year, it was something that I wanted to do. And if you want to know something about current policy or Brexit, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.